Jake Martinez pressed his face against the cold metal window and stared at the massive ship floating in space before them. The alien vessel was unlike anything humans had ever built. It looked like a crystal mountain turned inside out with lights that pulsed in colors his eyes could barely see. The UES Meridian felt tiny next to it like a rowboat beside an ocean liner. Captain Lisa Harper walked up behind Jake and put her hand on his shoulder. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too much space travel. Her uniform was crisp, but her face showed the stress of the past few weeks. The entire human race was counting on this mission, and everyone knew it. "First time seeing a collective ship up close?" she asked Jake in her calm voice. Jake nodded without turning away from the window. He was a neuroscientist from California who had spent his whole life studying how brains worked. Now he was about to meet beings whose brains worked in ways no human could understand. The communication panel crackled to life, and a voice spoke in perfect English, though it sounded like wind chimes mixed with static. "Human vessel Meridian, you are cleared for docking at Portal 7. Welcome to the Grand Synthesis. Prepare your minds for elevation." Lisa walked to the bridge where her small team was waiting. Ben Clark was checking his engineering equipment for the 10th time that day. He was a young man from Texas with rough hands and a mind that could fix anything mechanical. Amy Ross sat nearby, reading through her translation notes. She was a linguistics expert from New York who spoke 12 human languages and was trying to learn 3 alien ones. Danny Cole stood at the tactical station, even though there would be no fighting here. He was their strategist from Chicago, and his job was to think about problems from every angle. "Remember, team," Lisa said as they prepared to dock, "we are representing all of humanity today. These beings have been traveling the stars for millions of years, while we were still learning to make fire. They invited us to this gathering as a courtesy, not because they think we can help. We need to prove them wrong." The docking procedure was smooth but strange. Instead of the usual mechanical clamps and airlocks, the alien ship seemed to reach out with tendrils of energy that gently pulled the Meridian inside. Jake felt his stomach lurch as artificial gravity shifted from human normal to something else entirely. When they stepped through the airlock, Jake's breath caught in his throat. The interior of the alien ship was vast beyond belief. The ceiling stretched up so far it disappeared into darkness, while the walls curved away in impossible directions. Floating platforms moved through the air, carrying beings that Jake recognized from the briefing files but had never seen in person. The Zephyrians floated past first. They looked like jellyfish made of silver light with tendrils that sparked with electrical thoughts. Jake knew from the files that their brains were quantum computers that could process millions of calculations per second. One of them turned toward the human group, and Jake felt a pressure in his head like someone trying to read his thoughts. "Primitive but curious," the Zephyrian said without moving what might have been its mouth. The words appeared directly in Jake's mind. "Your neural pathways are chaotic and inefficient, yet you achieved space travel. Fascinating accident of evolution." Next came a group of crystalline architects. They moved on 4 legs that looked like living diamond while their bodies shifted between geometric shapes. These beings thought in mathematics so pure that human computers could not follow their logic. One of them approached the human team, and Jake heard music that might have been speech. Amy stepped forward and attempted a greeting in what she hoped was their mathematical language. She held up her hand, showing first 5 fingers, then 10, then made a pattern that represented the golden ratio. The crystalline being paused, and its body shifted into a new shape that somehow felt amused. "Your mathematics are like child drawings," it said in a voice like crystal bells, simple but showing potential for growth. "We will observe your attempts with interest." The Voidwalkers were the most disturbing to see. They appeared as dark shapes that seemed to absorb light around them, but Jake could see stars and galaxies swirling inside their forms. These beings existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions humans had no words for. When one passed nearby, Jake felt like he was looking into the deep space between galaxies. "Time moves differently for your species," the Voidwalker said, and its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You experience moments while we experience eternities. Your thoughts move like slow waves while ours move at light speed. It will be interesting to see if you can keep up." Lisa kept her expression neutral, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. These beings were making it clear that humans were the least intelligent species at this gathering. They were here as observers, maybe as entertainment, but not as equals. A platform floated down to collect the human team and carried them deeper into the ship. As they rose through the vast space, Jake saw hundreds of other beings from species he did not recognize. Some looked like living metals, while others appeared to be made of pure energy. All of them seemed to be having conversations at speeds no human could follow. The platform stopped at a large chamber where thousands of beings had gathered. At the center of the room was a holographic display showing something that made Jake's head hurt to look at directly. It was a map of the galaxy, but wrong somehow, as if space itself was being twisted into knots. A voice boomed through the chamber, speaking in a language that Jake's translation device struggled to process. Amy listened carefully and whispered to the team. "They are calling this the entropy crisis," she said quietly. "Something is making the universe decay faster than it should. Stars are burning out early, and space itself is becoming unstable. They have been trying to solve this problem for over 1,000 years, but every solution has failed." The voice continued, and Amy's face grew pale as she translated. "They are saying that this gathering represents the last hope, if the greatest. Minds in the galaxy cannot solve this problem, then entire star systems will begin collapsing within decades. Billions of civilizations will die." Jake looked around at the assembled aliens and felt very small. These beings had intelligence beyond human comprehension, yet they had failed to solve this crisis for 1,000 years. What could humans possibly contribute to this effort? Ben leaned over and whispered, "Captain, I am reading energy signatures I have never seen before. These beings are using technology that makes our best science look like stone tools." Danny was scanning the room with tactical eyes. "I count representatives from at least 50 different species," he said quietly. "All of them more advanced than us. We are definitely the new kids in this group." The display at the center of the room shifted, and Jake saw what looked like a cosmic storm spreading through space, consuming everything in its path. The image was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. This was the enemy they had come here to fight, and Jake was beginning to understand just how impossible their task might be. The first week aboard the collective ship was like drinking from a fire hose made of pure information. Jake watched in amazement as alien minds worked together in ways that seemed impossible. The Zephyrians would share complex theories by touching, their electrical tendrils together creating sparks of thought that moved faster than human speech. The crystalline architects communicated through mathematical equations that appeared as floating symbols in the air around them. The Voidwalkers simply seemed to know what each other were thinking, without any visible communication at all. Jake tried to follow along, but felt like a child listening to adults discuss quantum physics. When the aliens shared their research data, Jake's tablet computer took hours to process information they could absorb in seconds. When they ran simulations of possible solutions, Jake watched displays showing calculations that would take human supercomputers years to complete. Lisa assigned her team to different research groups, hoping they could contribute something useful. Jake joined the biological analysis team, where Zephyrian scientists were studying how the entropy crisis affected living organisms. Ben was placed with the engineering group, led by floating metal beings, called the Forge Masters. Amy worked with the communication specialist, trying to understand if the cosmic phenomenon had any kind of intelligence behind it. Danny was assigned to strategic planning, where various species debated how to coordinate their efforts across the galaxy. Each day brought new frustrations for the human team. In Jake's group, the aliens would present theories about cellular decay and genetic damage caused by entropy fields. When Jake tried to contribute observations about human biology, the Zephyrians would politely point out that human life forms were too simple to provide useful data. Their own biology was based on quantum probability waves rather than crude chemical reactions like DNA. Your species processes information through electrical impulses traveling along carbon fiber pathways, explained Zeth Prime, the lead Zephyrian researcher. This method is primitive and slow. Our consciousness exists as probability clouds that can examine all possible outcomes simultaneously. What takes your brain minutes to decide we can process in microseconds. Jake felt his face flush with embarrassment, but he noticed something odd about the Zephyrian's explanation. If you can see all possible outcomes, he asked, why haven't you solved the entropy crisis yet? Zeth Prime paused and his electrical tendrils dimmed slightly. The crisis presents infinite variables. Even our quantum processing has limits when faced with true chaos. We have identified 17,000 possible solutions, but each one leads to 17,000 new problems. Ben was having similar struggles with the Forge Masters. These beings had evolved beyond physical bodies and existed as living machines that could reshape matter at the molecular level. They showed him engineering marvels that bent the laws of physics, but when Ben suggested simpler mechanical solutions, they dismissed his ideas as primitive. Your species still relies on crude tools and combustion engines, said Unit Alpha, the lead Forge Master. You have not even achieved true artificial intelligence or matter conversion. How can such simple minds contribute to cosmic engineering? But Ben noticed something troubling about their advanced solutions. Every design the Forge Masters created was perfectly logical and mathematically elegant, but they all shared the same basic approach. They were trying to fight chaos with perfect order to stop entropy with perfect efficiency. What if we tried adding some randomness to the system? Ben suggested during one planning session. Sometimes the best solutions come from happy accidents. The alien engineers reacted as if Ben had suggested they solve the crisis by throwing rocks at it. Randomness is the enemy of engineering, Unit Alpha replied. Chaos is what we are fighting against. Why would we introduce more chaos into our solutions? Amy was learning even more disturbing things in her communication group. The aliens had spent centuries trying to establish contact with the entropy crisis, assuming it might be some kind of cosmic intelligence. They had beamed mathematical sequences, prime numbers and universal constants into the affected regions, but received no response. We have tried every logical approach to communication, explained her supervisor, a being called the Voice Weaver, who appeared as shifting patterns of sound and light. If the crisis contains intelligence, it does not follow rational communication protocols. Amy had been studying the data from these communication attempts and noticed something the aliens had missed. What if it's not ignoring you, she said carefully. What if it's responding in ways you don't recognize as communication? The Voice Weaver's patterns shifted to what Amy interpreted as confusion. Explain this theory, human scholar. Amy pulled up the data on her tablet and highlighted several sections. Look at these energy patterns from the affected regions. They don't match any natural phenomena, but they also don't look completely random. There's something almost like rhythm here, like it's trying to communicate through emotion rather than logic. Emotion is not communication, the Voice Weaver replied firmly. Emotion is chaos. Intelligence requires logic and order. If this phenomenon operates on emotion, then it is not truly intelligent and therefore cannot be reasoned with. Danny was discovering similar patterns in his strategic planning group. The aliens had approached the entropy crisis like a military campaign, identifying targets and deploying resources with perfect efficiency. Their strategies were flawless examples of coordinated thinking, but they were all variations on the same theme. Every plan assumes the crisis follows predictable rules, Danny told Lisa during their daily team meeting. They're treating it like a conventional enemy that will respond to conventional tactics. Lisa nodded grimly. She had been observing the overall coordination efforts and seeing the same pattern everywhere. These beings are incredibly intelligent, she said, but they all think in similar ways. Their intelligence has converged into predictable patterns. Jake leaned forward in his chair. That's what I've been noticing too. The Zephyrians can process infinite possibilities, but they only consider possibilities that follow logical rules. What if the crisis doesn't follow logical rules? Ben slammed his fist on the table in frustration. That's exactly what I tried to tell the Forge Masters, but they won't listen. They can't understand that sometimes the best solution is the one that doesn't make perfect sense. Amy pulled up her translation notes. I've been studying how different species think and communicate. Every single one of them has eliminated what they call cognitive errors from their mental processes. They don't experience intuition or gut feelings or sudden inspiration. They think everything through logically. Danny was nodding as the pieces came together. That's why they've been failing for 1,000 years. They're fighting chaos with order, fighting randomness with logic. But what if the crisis isn't their opposite? What if it's their complement? Lisa stood up and began pacing around their small quarters. You're saying that human thinking, with all our so-called flaws, might actually be useful here? Jake thought about his own research into consciousness and neural pathways. Human brains don't just process information, we feel our way through problems. We use intuition, emotion, and random connections that bypass logical reasoning. The aliens see these as primitive flaws, but maybe they're features, not bugs. Ben was getting excited now. In engineering, sometimes the elegant solution is wrong and the messy solution works. Sometimes you need to break the rules to solve the problem. Amy looked up from her notes. And in communication, sometimes the most important messages come through emotion and metaphor rather than pure data. Maybe we've been trying to speak the wrong language to this crisis. Danny leaned back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. So we have the most advanced minds in the galaxy all thinking in perfect logical harmony, and they're all missing the same blind spots. They've eliminated the very types of thinking that might actually solve this problem. Lisa stopped pacing and looked at her team. Are you suggesting that humanity's greatest weakness might actually be our greatest strength? Jake nodded slowly. The aliens keep calling us primitive and chaotic and unpredictable. What if those aren't insults? What if they're exactly the qualities needed to solve an unpredictable, chaotic crisis? Ben grinned for the first time since they had arrived. We're not the least intelligent species here. We're the only species that still thinks like this crisis thinks. Amy was already pulling up her communication data again. If I'm right about emotional patterns in the crisis responses, then we might be the only ones who can actually talk to this thing. Danny stood up and walked to the window where he could see the swirling energy patterns of the entropy crisis in the distance. The aliens have been trying to outsmart this phenomenon for 1,000 years. Maybe it's time to try being human instead. Lisa felt a spark of hope for the first time since their arrival. Her team was right. The aliens were incredibly intelligent, but they had evolved beyond the messy, chaotic, intuitive thinking that defined humanity. Maybe being primitive wasn't such a bad thing after all. Jake spent the next 3 days locked in his quarters doing something the aliens would consider completely illogical. Instead of analyzing data or running calculations, he was meditating and letting his mind wander freely through the problem. He thought about the entropy crisis not as a cosmic phenomenon to be solved, but as something alive and hurting. When he emerged from his self-imposed isolation, Jake had filled 17 pages with drawings and notes that looked more like poetry than science. Amy found him in the observation lounge staring out at the affected region of space with an expression she had never seen before. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, sitting down beside him. Jake turned to her with eyes that seemed to be seeing something far away. "Not a ghost," he said quietly. "Something that wants to be alive but doesn't know how. Amy, I think this crisis isn't destroying the universe. I think it's trying to understand the universe." Amy felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" Jake showed her his notes, which were filled with sketches of swirling patterns that looked remarkably similar to neural networks. "I've been thinking about this wrong. We all have. We keep assuming the entropy crisis is some kind of disease or weapon or natural disaster. But what if it's actually a form of consciousness that's just learning how to exist?" Ben had been working on his own theory in the engineering labs. While the Forge Masters designed perfect machines, Ben had been building what he called chaos engines. These devices operated on principles that violated everything the aliens knew about efficient engineering. Instead of precise calculations, Ben used random number generators and intuitive design choices that made no logical sense. "The aliens keep trying to create order," Ben explained to Lisa as he showed her his latest creation. "But the crisis feeds on order and turns it into chaos. So what if we fed it chaos directly? What if we gave it what it wants instead of fighting what it's doing?" Ben's device looked like a collection of spare parts held together with hope and determination. It generated random energy patterns that shifted and changed without any predictable sequence. When he activated it near a small entropy field, the results were unexpected. Instead of growing larger, the field began to stabilize and take on more organized patterns. Danny had been studying the tactical situation from a completely different angle. While the alien strategists planned massive coordinated efforts, Danny was looking at the psychology behind the crisis itself. He treated it not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a player in a complex game that nobody understood the rules to. Every time the aliens apply a logical solution, the crisis responds by becoming more chaotic. Danny explained to the team during their evening briefing. It's like they're having an argument where one side keeps speaking louder and the other side keeps speaking faster. Neither side is actually listening. Danny had started mapping the crisis responses not based on energy readings or mathematical models, but on patterns of behavior. He treated each expansion of the entropy field as a move in a game and tried to understand what the crisis was trying to achieve. Look at this, he said, pulling up his analysis charts. The crisis doesn't just randomly destroy things, it targets areas with the highest levels of organized activity. It goes after the most advanced civilizations first, the most complex technologies, the most ordered systems. It's like it's trying to balance something. Amy had been having breakthrough moments in her communication research. While the alien linguists continued beaming mathematical sequences into space, Amy had been trying something completely different. She was sending music poetry and emotional expressions translated into energy patterns. The results were small, but significant. When Amy transmitted a human lullaby converted to electromagnetic waves, the entropy field in that region seemed to calm down. When she sent angry music, the field became more agitated. When she sent sad songs, the field actually contracted, slightly as if it was responding to the emotion behind the communication. The voice weaver thinks I'm wasting time, Amy told the others. But I'm getting responses. The crisis isn't ignoring emotional communication. It's the only thing it seems to actually understand. Amy had started compiling a dictionary of emotional patterns that corresponded to different behaviors from the entropy fields. Fear made them expand rapidly. Anger made them pulse with destructive energy. But sadness and loneliness seemed to make them reach out as if looking for connection. Lisa watched her team work with a mixture of pride and terror. They were making discoveries that the galaxy's greatest minds had missed for 1,000 years. But she knew the aliens would never accept their theories. To the collective, emotional thinking was primitive and chaos was the enemy. Jake came to her with his most disturbing insight yet. Lisa, I think I know why the aliens can't solve this problem. The crisis isn't just conscious, it's lonely. It's a form of intelligence that exists in chaos and disorder, but it's surrounded by minds that only create order and logic. Every time they try to fix it, they're essentially telling it that its very nature is wrong. Ben nodded enthusiastically. That's why my chaos engines work. I'm not trying to impose order on the crisis, I'm giving it chaos to work with. I'm speaking its language instead of trying to force it to speak mine. Amy pulled up her communication, logs showing hundreds of failed attempts by alien species to establish contact. They've been trying to teach the crisis to think logically, but what if it already thinks perfectly, just not the way they do? What if chaos is its logic? Danny had been studying the historical data on the crisis and found something that made his blood run cold. Team, look at this timeline. The crisis started getting worse about 2,000 years ago, right around the time the ethereal collective was formed. The more organized and logical the galaxy became, the stronger and more chaotic the crisis became. Lisa felt the pieces clicking together in her mind. You're saying the crisis is a reaction to the collective itself? That cosmic intelligence is fighting back against cosmic organization? Jake nodded grimly. The universe is trying to maintain balance. The aliens have created perfect order and logic, so the universe created perfect chaos and intuition to balance it out. We're not dealing with a disease, we're dealing with an immune response. Ben was getting excited again. That's why human thinking works. We're not perfectly logical or perfectly chaotic, we're both at the same time. We're the balance point between order and chaos. Amy looked up from her translation work with wide eyes. If you're right, then every attempt to solve this crisis with pure logic has been making it worse. The aliens have been feeding the problem instead of solving it. Danny leaned back in his chair with a grim expression. And if we're right about Then we need to completely change our approach. We can't fight the crisis and we can't cure it. We need to communicate with it and maybe even cooperate with it. Lisa stood up and began pacing again. The aliens will never accept this theory. To them, chaos is evil and order is good. They can't understand that the universe might need both. Jake pulled up his drawings and notes, spreading them across the table. Then we'll have to prove it to them. But first, we need to test our theory properly. We need to try actually communicating with the crisis using human methods instead of alien logic. Ben was already sketching designs for larger chaos engines. I can build devices that generate more complex random patterns. Instead of fighting entropy, we can dance with it. Amy was composing messages in her head already. I can create emotional communication protocols. Instead of mathematical sequences, I can send feelings and metaphors and stories. Danny was planning the strategic approach. And I can coordinate our efforts to work with the crisis patterns instead of against them. We treat it as an ally instead of an enemy. Lisa looked at her team and realized they were about to attempt something that would either save the galaxy or get them all expelled from the collective in disgrace. They were going to try talking to a cosmic force using poetry and chaos engines and human intuition. Are we really going to bet the universe on the idea that human thinking is better than the greatest minds in the galaxy? She asked. Jake smiled for the first time in weeks. Not better, he said. Different. The aliens are incredibly smart, but they're all smart in the same way. Sometimes the universe needs a different kind of smart. Lisa stood before the assembled collective leadership, knowing that her next words would either change everything or destroy her career. The massive chamber held representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy and their collective. Intelligence pressed down on her like a physical weight. She could feel their contempt for human primitive thinking radiating from every corner of the room. Honored members of the collective. Lisa began keeping her voice steady. Humanity requests permission to attempt our own solution to the entropy crisis. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Zeth Prime's electrical tendrils sparked with what Lisa now recognized as laughter. Unit Alpha's mechanical form shifted into shapes that expressed mechanical amusement. The Voidwalkers simply ignored her as if she had not spoken at all. The Grand Coordinator, a being of pure energy that served as the collective's leader, spoke in a voice like distant thunder. Captain Harper, your species has been observers at this gathering, not participants. You lack the cognitive capacity to contribute meaningful solutions to cosmic problems. Lisa had expected this response. With respect, Grand Coordinator, our cognitive differences might be exactly what's needed. We believe the crisis operates on principles that pure logic cannot address. Explain, the Grand Coordinator commanded, though its tone suggested this was mere politeness before dismissal. Jake stepped forward with his neural interface headset and the pages of drawings and notes that looked so primitive compared to the holographic displays around them. We believe the entropy crisis is not a phenomenon to be solved, but a consciousness to be communicated with. The chamber erupted in what could only be described as intellectual laughter. The crystalline architects created geometric patterns that expressed mathematical impossibility. The Forge Masters generated sounds like machinery breaking down. The Zephyrians created light shows of pure derision. Consciousness requires logic, Zeth Prime declared. Chaos cannot be conscious because consciousness is the organization of information into coherent patterns. Your theory violates the fundamental principles of intelligence. Amy stepped forward with her emotional communication protocols. What if our definition of consciousness is too narrow? What if intelligence can exist in forms we don't recognize because we only look for intelligence that thinks like us? The voice weaver manifested as discordant sounds that hurt human ears. Intelligence is universal. Logic is universal. Mathematics is universal. Emotion is a primitive survival mechanism that true intelligence evolves beyond. Ben came forward, carrying his chaos engine, which looked like junk compared to the elegant alien technology surrounding them. But what if chaos has its own logic? What if randomness follows patterns we just can't see? Unit Alpha's response was immediate. Randomness, by definition, cannot follow patterns. Order and chaos are opposites. Engineering requires precision, not guesswork. Danny stepped up with his behavioral analysis charts. Then why have all your precise logical solutions failed? You've had the greatest minds in the galaxy working on this for 1,000 years, and the crisis only gets worse. The Grand Coordinator's energy patterns shifted to what Lisa interpreted as irritation. Our solutions have failed because the problem is more complex than anticipated, not because our methods are flawed. Logic and order will eventually triumph over chaos and entropy. Lisa realized they were getting nowhere with logical arguments. The aliens were too committed to their worldview to consider alternatives. She made a decision that would either save the galaxy or end her career. Then we request permission to conduct our own experiment, Lisa said firmly. Give us access to a small entropy field and let us test our theories. If we fail, you lose nothing but time. If we succeed, everyone wins. The chamber fell silent for several minutes as the alien minds consulted among themselves at light speed. Finally, the Grand Coordinator spoke. Request denied. Your primitive methods pose unacceptable risks to cosmic stability. Human involvement in this crisis could cause catastrophic expansion of entropy fields. Lisa felt her heart sink, but Jake stepped forward with determination in his voice. Then we'll conduct the experiment without permission. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Energy beings flared with anger. Crystal formations turned red with rage. Mechanical parts started spinning ominously. The Voidwalkers became visible, for the first time their dark forms radiating menace. You will do no such thing, the Grand Coordinator commanded. Any unauthorized interference with entropy fields will be considered an act of cosmic terrorism. You will be detained, and your species will be banned from all collective activities. But Lisa had made her choice. Team Initiate Protocol Chaos, Ben, activated his Chaos engine, which immediately began generating random energy patterns that made the alien sensors scream warnings. Amy started transmitting her emotional communication sequences, sending waves of human feelings into space. Danny began coordinating their efforts using strategies that deliberately broke every rule of logical planning. Jake put on his neural interface and opened his mind to the chaotic patterns around them. The alien response was swift and overwhelming. Security forces materialized around the humans' energy fields designed to contain them and shut down their equipment. But something unexpected happened. As the aliens tried to impose order on the human chaos, the entropy field visible through the chamber windows began to react. Instead of the usual destructive expansion, the entropy field started to pulse in rhythm with Ben's chaos engine. When Amy transmitted a lullaby in electromagnetic form, the field's violent churning calmed to gentle swirls. When Jake opened his mind and started thinking in purely human intuitive patterns, the field actually began to contract. Impossible. Zeth Prime declared, his electrical tendrils dimming with confusion. The crisis is responding to their chaotic inputs. This violates all known principles of cosmic mechanics. Unit Alpha's mechanical systems were overloading as it tried to process what it was seeing. Randomness cannot create order. This is a logical paradox that cannot exist. But the Voidwalkers were having a different reaction. Their dark forms were shifting and changing as if they were seeing something the others could not. Wait, one of them said in a voice like stars being born. Look deeper at what is happening. The Grand Coordinator paused the security response and focused its immense intelligence on the entropy field. What it saw defied everything it understood about reality. The chaos was creating its own kind of order. The randomness was following its own strange logic. The crisis was responding to human emotions like a living thing that had finally found someone who spoke its language. Jake was deep in his neural interface now, and his consciousness was touching something vast and lonely and desperate for connection. He could feel the entity behind the entropy crisis, and it was nothing like what anyone had imagined. It was young and confused and trying to understand a universe that only spoke to it in mathematics when it communicated through feeling. It's not trying to destroy anything, Jake said, his voice distant and strange. It's trying to learn. It's trying to grow. But every time it reaches out, the universe responds with logic and order, and that's not its language. It speaks in chaos, and emotion and intuition. Amy was getting responses to her emotional transmissions now. The entity was sending back feelings of joy and relief and something like gratitude. For the first time in its existence, something was communicating with it in ways it could understand. "It's been alone," Amy said, tears streaming down her face. "For thousands of years it's been trying to talk to civilizations that only speak in mathematics. It's been reaching out for connection, and everyone has been trying to silence it instead." Ben's chaos engines were synchronizing with the entropy field, now creating patterns of beautiful randomness that somehow made perfect sense. The destructive energy that had threatened star systems was transforming into something creative and generative. "The crisis isn't evil," Ben said, wonder in his voice. "It's just different. It thinks in chaos the way we think in logic. We've been trying to cure something that was never sick, just foreign." Danny was coordinating their efforts, now using human intuition to guide their interaction with the cosmic entity. "It doesn't want to destroy order," he realized. "It wants to balance order. The universe had too much logic and structure, so it created chaos to balance things out." The alien observers watched in stunned silence as their 1,000-year crisis began to stabilize under human influence. The entropy fields were still chaotic, but they were no longer destructive. They were creative, chaotic like human art or music or poetry. Lisa looked around at the shocked alien faces and realized that everything had changed. Humanity had not just solved the crisis, they had revealed that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had imagined. Intelligence came in more forms than pure logic, and consciousness could exist in chaos as well as order. The Grand Coordinator spoke in a voice filled with something that might have been respect. "How did you know?" Lisa smiled and gestured to her team. "We didn't know. We guessed. We felt our way through the problem instead of thinking our way through it. Sometimes the best solutions come not from intelligence but from understanding." Jake felt the cosmic consciousness flowing through his mind like warm water after years of drought. The entity that they had called the entropy crisis was sharing its memories with him, and what he experienced changed everything he thought he knew about intelligence and consciousness and the nature of reality itself. The being had been born from the collision of two black holes billions of years ago. Its first moments of awareness had been filled with chaos and destruction, but also with incredible creativity and potential. It had tried to communicate with the civilizations it encountered, but they responded to its chaotic nature with fear and attempts at containment. "It's not malicious," Jake said, his voice echoing strangely as part of his consciousness existed in normal space and part in the chaotic dimensions where the entity lived. "It's curious. It wants to learn and grow and create, but every time it tries, the galaxy treats it like a disease to be cured." Amy was deep in conversation with the entity, now using emotional languages that had no words, but conveyed meaning through pure feeling. She was learning about loneliness that stretched across millennia and a desperate hunger for connection that had been frustrated by civilizations that only spoke in mathematics. "It's been trying to teach us," Amy said, wonder filling her voice. "Every entropy field, every expansion of chaos has been an attempt at communication. It's been trying to show us that reality is bigger and stranger than our ordered thinking allows." Ben's chaos engines were now working in harmony with the entity, creating patterns of beautiful randomness that generated energy instead of destroying it. The entropy fields were transforming from destructive storms into creative forces that seemed to sing with joy at finally being understood. "Look at this," Ben called out, pointing to his displays. "The entity isn't just conscious, it's incredibly creative. It's been trying to make art with cosmic forces. Every entropy expansion has been like a painting or a song that we were too focused on logic to appreciate." Danny was coordinating the interaction now, but his role had changed from strategist to translator. He was helping the alien civilizations understand what they were seeing and why their 1,000 years of failure suddenly made sense. "The entity doesn't think in linear time like we do," Danny explained to the assembled collective leadership. "It experiences all possibilities simultaneously, which is why it creates chaos. From its perspective, it's creating every possible outcome at once, which looks random to us, but has its own strange logic." The Grand Coordinator was struggling to process this revelation. Its energy patterns flickered with confusion as it tried to integrate this new understanding into its perfectly ordered worldview. "If what you say is true, then our entire approach has been counterproductive," We have been treating a conscious being as a natural disaster and responding to its attempts at communication as attacks. Zeth Prime was experiencing something that might have been shame if quantum electrical beings could feel such emotions. We measured its intelligence against our own standards and found it lacking. We never considered that intelligence might exist in forms we could not recognize. Unit Alpha's mechanical systems were overloading as it tried to recalculate everything it thought it knew about consciousness and order. Our engineering principles are based on the assumption that chaos is always destructive, but this entity creates through chaos the way we create through order. The Voice Weaver was attempting something unprecedented for its species. It was trying to communicate using emotional patterns instead of pure information. The results were clumsy and amateur, but the entity responded with what could only be described as encouragement. "It's teaching us," the Voice Weaver said, its patterns shifting to express wonder. "This consciousness is showing us new ways to think and communicate that we abandoned millions of years ago when we evolved beyond emotion." Lisa watched the transformation happening throughout the chamber as alien minds that had been rigid with logic for millennia began to experiment with chaos and intuition. It was like watching ice melt after an eternal winter. But Jake was receiving more complex communications from the entity now, and what he learned filled him with both hope and concern. The entity wants to cooperate with us, but it needs something in return. It's been alone for so long that pure isolation is driving it toward genuine madness. It needs conscious minds that can think in both order and chaos to help it maintain stability. Amy looked up from her emotional conversation with the entity. "It's offering a partnership. It will help us explore the universe in ways we never imagined if we help it understand how to interact with ordered civilizations without destroying them." Ben was already sketching designs for hybrid technologies that combined ordered engineering with chaotic creativity. "Imagine what we could build together. Machines that create instead of just manufacturing. Technologies that grow and evolve instead of just following programming." Danny was thinking about the strategic implications. This changes everything about how civilizations interact. Instead of every species evolving toward the same type of logical thinking, we could have true diversity of consciousness, order and chaos working together instead of fighting. The entity was sharing more of itself now, and Jake could feel its vast intelligence touching every mind in the chamber. It was not trying to impose its chaotic thinking on the ordered alien minds, but showing them how both types of consciousness could coexist and complement each other. "It's showing us balance," Jake said, his voice filled with awe. "The universe needs both order and chaos, logic and intuition, structure and creativity. The entity isn't the opposite of our intelligence, it's the complement to our intelligence." The Grand Coordinator was experiencing something unprecedented in its billions of years of existence. It was feeling, rather than just thinking, and the sensation was both terrifying and wonderful. "We have made a grave error," the Grand Coordinator declared, its energy patterns shifting to express what humans might recognize as humility. "We believed that intelligence was a hierarchy with logic at the top and emotion at the bottom. But consciousness is not a hierarchy. It is a spectrum, and we have been living at only one end of that spectrum." Zeth Prime approached Jake with electrical tendrils extended in what was clearly a gesture of respect. "Human Jake Martinez, your species has given us the greatest gift imaginable. You have shown us that intelligence comes in more forms than we ever imagined." Unit Alpha's mechanical form was shifting into new configurations as it tried to incorporate random elements into its perfectly ordered structure. "We wish to learn this chaos thinking. Will your species teach us how to be properly illogical?" The Voice Weaver was creating music now instead of pure information, and the sounds were strange and beautiful, and unlike anything heard in the galaxy for millions of years. "The entity is teaching us to sing instead of just speak. We had forgotten that communication could be art." Amy laughed through her tears as she felt the loneliness of the cosmic entity finally beginning to heal. "It's not just willing to teach you, it's desperate to teach you. It's been waiting for someone to ask for so long." Ben activated his most complex chaos engine, and the patterns it created were picked up by the entity and transformed into something that looked like cosmic music made visible. We're going to revolutionize everything. Engineering, science, art, communication. Nothing will be the same. Lisa felt a pride deeper than anything she had experienced as a military officer. Her species had not just solved the galaxy's greatest crisis, they had opened the door to a new age of cooperation between different types of consciousness. Jake was beginning to withdraw from his deep connection with the entity, but he carried with him knowledge that would take lifetimes to fully understand. The entity wants to establish permanent communication with all of our species. It wants to create a new kind of galactic community where order and chaos learn from each other instead of fighting. Danny was already planning the integration protocols. We'll need new kinds of education systems where logical species learn chaotic thinking and vice versa. New technologies that combine both approaches. New art forms that express both order and chaos. The Grand Coordinator spoke with a voice that somehow conveyed both authority and wonder. The Ethereal Collective hereby invites the Entropy Consciousness to become our newest member. And we formally recognize humanity not as primitive observers, but as our teachers in the ways of balanced thinking. Amy felt the entity's joy like sunshine after storm, as it finally found acceptance and partnership instead of fear and rejection. The galaxy was about to become a much more interesting and creative place. Jake opened his eyes and looked around at aliens and humans working together to understand new forms of consciousness. The strongest minds in the galaxy tried to outsmart us, he said with a smile. But they ended up learning that being smart isn't about having the biggest brain. It's about knowing when to think and when to feel, when to plan and when to improvise, when to create order, and when to embrace chaos. Ben laughed as his chaos engines harmonized with alien logic processors, creating hybrid technologies that neither species could have imagined alone. Turns out the universe is big enough for all kinds of intelligence.